Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today I wanted to talk about unique items, but unique items that are available on somewhat of a budget. I'm not going to be talking about the very cheapest unique items in the game here, other things that you can pick up for 2 or 3 Chaos Orbs or less. I'm going to talk about items that I think are the very best unique items that you can get under 2 exalts. And in fact, whilst these items are all under 2 exalts, I actually think that they're pretty much the best uniques under 50 exalts as well. So whilst there's a bunch of uniques that are more expensive than this because they're a bit rarer, these are some of the most powerful items in the game at the moment. I also think that it's a very realistic bet that every single one of them might well end up getting nerfed in 3.17. So Brass Stone was buffed to the moon and back. I think this is the least likely to get a nerf, but it was buffed to the moon and back in 3.16, and I would argue that it is now the second best defensive armor in the game, and the only one that's better is almost pushing 1,000 exalts at the moment. Leadership's price is second, and the Brittle mechanic in general is ridiculously powerful. We'll come to what that does when we talk about the item, but Leadership's price is an amulet that drops from the capstone content from Heist, and even though I felt like it was going to get nerfed in 3.16, most people thought it would, it didn't. It is absolutely ridiculous at the moment. And third, there's March of the Legion, which is not fun at all to use, but its power simply cannot be denied. So let's start with March of the Legion. This is all about auras, and this is about making your auras as powerful as possible and letting you use as many of them as you possibly can. So there's not much to say really about these boots, other than that they are crazily overpowered and they are just downright awful to use. Blessing reserves your mana for a base 200 milliseconds. Now this scales with your character's increases to duration, and you will want lots of increases to duration. If you're building around this item, you're probably going to want to have your duration in the plus 80% minimum range, and ideally quite a bit more than that. Now what you're rewarded with for reserving your mana for this 200 millisecond base time period that might end up being extended to 400 is that for 56 times as long as you reserved your mana, you get that aura for free. So if you fire off Grace from March of the Legion, you pay the cost for Grace and you're actually reserving the mana for 200 milliseconds, then you get 11.2 seconds of Grace. And both of those figures scale with your character's duration effects. So if you've got double duration from a group of effects all working together, then you're reserving your mana for 400 milliseconds, and then you're receiving 22.4 seconds of Grace in return. This functions like a normal aura, and so it can affect your teammates, but because of the way that the March of the Legion synergizes with other things on the passive tree, it may actually be best to give that up. Supreme Ego is a keystone that limits you to only one permanent aura on you from your skills. And it also means that your auras from your skills do not affect your allies. However, auras from your skill have 50% more effect on you. So this means that if you've gone from 100% base effect to 200% through scaling various methods of scaling aura effect, that 200% will then become 300% base effect. For an aura like Determination that scales on 2 different axes, that is incredible. Supreme Ego also has a serious drawback of 50% more reservation of skills, but that's manageable. So the key thing here is that permanent auras are auras with no duration. The Blessing support gem, which is not available in the game, it's not available through any means other than March of the Legion. This actually adds the duration tag to the auras that it supports, and as a result, Supreme Ego works in conjunction with March of the Legion. So you can permanently leave on your single one of your auras that you choose, one of them that you choose. For my character that runs this combination, they're running Defiance Banner permanently. So they have Defiance Banner on permanently. That's their permanent aura. And then they use Supreme Ego to fire off Grace, Determination, Anger, and Wrath. And that's what that character is using. The problem is that you need to, in order to use March of the Legion, you're getting a tremendous amount of power for it, but you have to continually keep pressing all these extra buttons. So you'll need to set up a second keybind. And so for me, it's Control Q for Determination, Control W for Grace, Control E for Wrath, and Control R for Anger, I think. Something like that. And that can end up being really clunky to use. However, the power is absolutely undeniable. In terms of the price you're going to pay for this, March of the Legion has a variable roll on move speed, 20 to 30%. If you're going to go for 30%, you're not going to settle for anything less. Expect to pay 1 Exalted Orb for these boots. If you're willing to settle for 29%, then expect to pay 50 chaos. If you're willing to settle for any roll, then you can get these for about 20 chaos. These are a drop anywhere item, and they're tier 2 rarity. Now, tier 2 is quite rare. It's not staggeringly rare, but it is quite rare. Estimates vary, but some people think that this is about 16 times as rare as Tabula Rasa. Some people think it's about 25 times as rare as Tabula Rasa. So that should give you a bit of a sense as to how likely you are to encounter this in your own travels. Most likely you'll have to trade for it unless you're absolutely obsessed with the game, in which case you've probably had 6 of these drop for you. It does seem to come up a bit in Ritual in my experience, but that might just be a small sample size because I've had 2 of them in Rituals in this league. Next up is the Brass Dome. This is, in my opinion, the best defensive armor that you can get unless you're one of the elite few that can afford Stasis Prison. So this does a few things. Firstly, it nerfs enemy crit multiplier down to 100%. This is down from 130% baseline and potentially as much as 230% if the map has crit multi on it and also the monster has a local critical strike modifier on it. So that's significant, really significant. It can just get rid of surprise things that can kill you. So being hit for 4,000 damage is never nice. Being critically hit for 5,200 is a lot worse. Do note that this prevents you taking additional damage from critical strikes, but it does not prevent you from suffering elemental ailments from critical strikes. So if an enemy hits you on a map that has, say, the effect monsters deal an additional 109% of their physical damage as cold damage. Actually, let's just make that 120%. Makes the numbers nicer. If a monster hits you for 2,500 physical damage, and then that mod adds an additional 3,000 base cold damage, which your character is probably going to suffer as 600 cold damage because of Brass Dome. If that's a normal hit, that's not going to freeze you. However, if that's a critical hit, it's likely to freeze you. It won't be a long duration freeze, but that'll be 600 damage that was dealt by a critical hit. Even though you're only taking 600 cold, you're not taking an extra 30% or more, you are still taking cold damage. So this is not providing you with immunity to elemental ailments caused by critical strikes. You will still suffer those, but it does provide you with immunity from all that extra damage. And that extra damage is the scariest part of crits. So 5% to all maximum elemental resistances. This is actually a roll, and the roll range is 1% through 5%. You should not use this item unless it's 5%. And you can sort of settle for 4%, but it is meaningfully worse than a 5% one. You really should just pick it up at 5%. And if someone's got a corrupted one that's 3%, don't pick it up. If you've got one that's got 3% and 399%, which is almost a perfect increased armor roll, then at that case, you also probably don't want to use it. You want to Divine Orb it until you've got 5%. But Divine Orbing it to 5% is only going to cost you an average of 5 Divine Orbs and is well worth it. This item does have 2 drawbacks. Firstly, there's the inherent drawback of it providing no bonus to maximum life because it doesn't have a life mod on it. And secondly, it's got this mod Strength provides no bonus to maximum life. Given that this actually ends up mostly being used on spellcasters, that tends to be minus 90 life. That's if you've got 180 strength on your character, and that's usually about the amount of strength you need to have in order to use all of your gems on a spellcaster character. So that is a meaningful drawback, but it's not a devastating drawback. The other thing that's a little bit less obvious, and this is less important in the Scourge League, this item can be very hard to get the right colours on. The solution to this is one of 2 things. Either you can corrupt the item, and then once it's corrupted, you can then apply Tainted Chromatic Orbs. That's one option. Your second option is to use Harvest crafting. Harvest has a very common set of crafts that will change the colors of various sockets on items. Whilst changing a single socket color is a rare craft, such as change a non-green craft to change a random non-green socket to a green socket, that's quite a rare craft. It is not rare at all to get changed 2 random sockets on the item, one of them to blue, one of them to green. And I was able to use that craft a few times in order to get my 5 off-color Brass Dome reasonably easily. I took a little bit messing around, but I eventually got there. Last thing I want to say on this, it's really cheap. 1 exalt for 6 link corrupt with 5%, less for unlinked, and the item scourges surprisingly well. Now, it's still a high risk thing to scourge this, but there is a quite common mod that adds flat armor to the brass dome. And when you get that, that is actually scaled by this massive 350 to 400% increased armor mod. And so getting that together can be really, really strong. There's a bunch of them up for trade that have 4,400, 4,500 armor on them. And so that's something that's a mod that would usually be rubbish to get out of this as a Scourge positive. Getting this sort of plus 100 or plus 125 flat armor is actually really good on the brass dome. And there's a bunch of other ones. There are still quite some nasty drawbacks. So it is a high risk option, but it is something that you can definitely do. So this is also drop anywhere. It is also tier 2 rarity. So again, it's not something you'll see often, but it is something that will drop for enough players throughout the league economy that you can pick one up in trade. If you're in solo self-found, you'll have a hard time getting this, but it's not impossible. Lastly, we're going to move to leadership's price. This item is arguably, at least in my opinion, this is the most powerful item in the game under chase item status. So if we're not counting the Squire, we're not counting the Headhunter, we're not counting Mage Blood, this is arguably the best unique item in the game now. So this is a complex item and it's a powerhouse. It drops exclusively from the twins. This is a contract that is the capstone encounter of Heist. In order to have the twins able to drop for you, it can only drop in 2 places. The first one is inside reward room chests in Heist, and the second one, which is by far the more common, is from smugglers' caches in maps. In order to get it added to your smugglers' cache loot table, however, you need to have completed pretty much all of the Heist contracts that are quest contracts. So all of those green contracts that keep getting dropped out of smugglers' caches, you don't actually need to do all of those. Once you've done, it's not quite all of them, but once you've done most of them, and once you've done a few specific ones, the twins contract will be added to your drop table. At that point, if you're able to beat the encounter, which is not that hard, although the bosses are a sack of hit points, they don't have any really dangerous abilities. If you're able to beat them, then at that point, you will always get a leadership's price drop. Now, when it drops, there's a couple of things that need to be said about it. Firstly, it always drops corrupted, and that means that it is immune to having blessed orbs or divine orbs used on it. This is important because whilst blessed orbs don't make a huge difference on an Onyx amulet, it's a difference between 10 to all attributes and 16 to all attributes, which obviously you'd rather have 16. 10 is perfectly serviceable. There are also 3 mods, -3 to +3 to maximum fire resist, and the same for cold and the same for lightning. And these are all independently rolled. Now, if this item didn't drop corrupted, you would be able to spam it with divine orbs and keep going until you hit at least 2 of them at 3% and 1 of them at 2%, which would take you an average of 85 divine orbs, and you'd get that, and that'd be worth it because the item is really, really good when you get it that well rolled. However, it's immune to divine orbs. That's not an option. And so an item, a leadership's price that has low rolls cannot be turned into something better than it is. It's still really good, but generally speaking, I think you want to look for ones that have at worst rolls are -1%, and ideally no rolls below 0. And additionally, you want the 3 numbers to add up to at least +3. If you can get that, and you can usually get that in trade for 50 chaos or so late in the league, then you've got yourself a solid starting place for a leadership's price. Then at that point, you're going to need to cough up the expensive part. You're going to need to buy a Tainted Oil, and they cost 2 exalts at the moment. So you can use leadership's price until you get the Tainted Oil, but when you've got the Tainted Oil, it's really worth using it. It'll give you a considerable extra boost of power on the character. And then let's talk about what this item does. So we've already said that it can give you up to 3 to maximum fire, cold, and lightning resist. It won't always do that. Poorly rolled ones will have worse rolls there. It also has a huge drawback. It cannot ignite, chill, freeze, or shock. Ouch. That is no laughing matter. But this effect is so powerful, it is not funny. So you have Scorching Conflux. What Scorching Conflux means is that all of your damage, whether it is fire or not, will always inflict the Scorch ailment. The Scorch ailment reduces monster maximum resistance. Brittle Conflux is the broken one. We'll come back to that in a sec. Sapping Conflux, all of your damage, whether it's lightning damage or not, inflicts the alternate ailment Sap. Sap reduces the damage that monsters deal. And then third, Brittle Conflux. All of your damage, whether it is cold or not, inflicts Brittle. Brittle causes monsters to have an increased susceptibility to suffer critical hits. Brittle scales to the moon and back, and the numbers on it are just bonkers. You can have a character that is 30% to inflict a critical hit, but then as soon as a monster has Brittle on it, you're 100% to crit them. And that is how powerful the Brittle mechanic is. And so as long as you can keep your two highest attributes equal, so this means that perhaps your dexterity and your intelligence are equal to each other and your strength is way lower, then as long as you've got that combination set up, you will have Scorching Conflux, Brittle Conflux, and Sapping Conflux. You will need to jump through a number of hoops in order to use this item. Normally you will need to find one attribute transforming jewel, and you will need to have the perfect number on it. So you'll know jewels like Fertile Mind, which is 16 to 24 intelligence, and also transforms all strength in the area into intelligence. You will need to find one of these for your character usually, and you'll need to find the precise number on it. You may not want 24. It may be that you need to use a 21 or something like that. Alternately, you can balance your stats through other means. You can balance it through benchcrafts and through using benchcrafts and just keep applying a benchcraft until you get the exact number that you need. So let's say that there's a benchcraft for 21 to 25 dexterity, and you need 24 dexterity in order to get balanced. Well, you're just going to need to keep reapplying that benchcraft until you hit 24%. Not 24%, 24 flat. Leadership's price is worth jumping through these hoops for because it is so ridiculously powerful. It flat out doesn't work on builds that are reliant upon Ignite, Chill, Freeze, or Shock for obvious reasons, but it is incredible on pretty much any elemental damage build that inflicts hits on enemies. So that's the last of these uniques I wanted to discuss. If you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, may your Val Orbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.